Hi everyone, welcome back to MovieJube. I'm Jade, if you don't know, and I am back with some more Lord of the Rings lore, and I'm super excited to check this out. This has been long awaited, and I've really wanted to know more about this. I'm going to be learning today about Numenor. So I'm going to be, of course, checking out Men of the West. As always, I will link his channel in the description, so definitely check him out, and the pinned comment, if you haven't already, of course. But yeah, so I'm going to start with the rise and downfall of Numenor. I'm so excited to learn about this. Thank you all so much for your suggestions, and please keep them coming because I love learning this lore that is seemingly so vast and endless. But yeah, let's get into it.
But when Ar-Pharazôn set foot upon the shores of Aman the Blessed, the Valar laid down their guardianship and called upon the One, and the world was changed. Numenor was thrown down and swallowed in the sea, and the Undying Lands were removed forever from the circles of the world. So ended the glory of Numenor.
Damn.
Greetings, my friends. I hope you all are doing very
Hi,
well
Yoiston.
wherever you are in Middle-earth today. Yoiston here with a long overdue video discussing the rise and fall of Numenor. As this is a video about the entirety of Numenor's history, I will not mention every specific detail that happened, but rather I will talk about the important pieces, and I can cover more specific details in later videos. Let's get right into it and see how this land of blessed men met its end.
Yes, please.
In the year 32 of the Second Age, the island of Numenor was raised out of the Great Sea of Belegar by the Valar
So
to
previously it
reward
was...
the Edain, the men who had lived in Beleriand during the First Age,
Huh.
for their valiant efforts against Morgoth in the War of the Great Jewels and the other conflicts that ensued. This place was also called Alena, meaning Star Wards, as their
Alana.
first king, Elros Tar-Menutur, led the newly named Dunedain, or Men of the West, to the island of Numenor while following the Star of Arendil.
Interesting.
The descendants of the House of Beor sailed here to escape the troubles of Middle-earth, and so Numenor began to prosper as the land of the High Men. The capital city
Land
of the
of the
island
High
was
Men.
called Armenelos, where the kings and queens of Numenor would rule, while the mountain Meneltarma at the center of the island was used as a temple to Iluvatar, where the great eagles of Manwë would fly. I must also
Beautiful.
mention the city of Andune, which was originally the largest city in Numenor, because the elves of Tol Eressëa would often visit there. This was the most western city on the island,
So that'd be
closest
closer to-
Valinor
yeah,
geography and philosophies. It shall become more important later on.
Okay.
After Elros, the first king of Numenor, passed away, the scepter of Numenor was passed to Vardamir Nolamon before
Damn.
coming to Tar Amandil immediately.
beautiful.
This scepter would be passed from the ruler to the heir, and eventually the sixth ruler, Tar Aldarion, changed the law of succession to make it the eldest heir of the ruler is crowned, whether that heir was a son or a daughter.
Oh, cool.
Over time, the Numenoreans became a powerful race of men and some of the best mariners in the history of Middle-earth.
Well, yeah,
and
they'd have to be good
continued
at
to become even greater
at
as the
ocean
Second
faring.
Age endured.
Cool.
They were also gifted long lifespans of around 350 years,
Damn.
while those of the royal line lived to be around 400 years old. However,
Wow.
these gifts came with a cost, as the Numenoreans were also subjected to their own version of the Ban of the Valar. As the Numenoreans were allowed to sail west for as far as they could still see the island of Numenor, as the Valar forbade the men from coming to Aman.
Oh,
But the
interesting.
Numenoreans were still allowed to sail to Middle-earth and colonize
Okay,
locations
so they
there.
could go to and
In the
from
year
Middle-earth,
600,
but they
the
couldn't
first
go...
boats from Numenor returned to
Valinor.
Middle-earth under the
I didn't know
leadership of the
that.
captain of the king's ships, Vaentur. The Numenoreans established contact with the middlemen of the world, and the elves who resided in Middle-earth at this time. In the year 630, King Tar Alendil created the title Lord of Andune in honor of his grandson Valandil, who would be the first lord. The lords of Andune would be the descendants of Elros, but in a different line than the line of kings of Numenor.
Okay.
The lords of Andune would be the leaders of the faithful, as they were called, and they would continue to advocate friendship with the Valar and the elves, even as Numenor darkened. They would also serve on the Council of the Scepter that would help govern Numenor. We will
Cool.
talk about them later on when I mention Elendil the Tall.
Okay.
Moving on, I must talk more about Tar Aldarion, who was born in the year 700 and would make many trips from Numenor to Middle-earth throughout the course of his life.
Okay.
His journeys would help solidify the alliances between the men of Numenor and the elves of Gil-galad's kingdom.
Cool. So the
Aldarion
elves
would
and
also
Numenoreans
found
were
the
tight.
Guild of Adventurers in 750,
Relatively
which
tight.
would be a group of mariners in Numenor. He would also begin construction on Vinya Lande, or New Haven as it was known, between the years of 739 and 800 in the Second Age, which would be the first of many havens to be built by Numenoreans in Middle-earth. Many years later, as Numenor continued to prosper and grow in size, the mariners began to establish more permanent havens in Middle-earth. We can already see just how expansive the Numenoreans became in the first half of the Second Age. Eventually, Sauron, who had been under the disguise of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, revealed his true self to the elves of Middle-earth, and he started the War of the Elves and Sauron. Eventually, the Dark Lord overran Eriador in 1699 of the Second Age, and the elves likely would have been doomed had it not been for the valor of the Numenoreans under the rule of Tar Minastir.
Okay.
In 1700, the Numenoreans sent a great fleet to help Gil-galad in Lindon, and eventually they defeated Sauron and ended the war. I believe it was at this time that the Numenoreans were at the height of their power while also maintaining virtue.
Right.
For we shall see them gain more of the former and lose more of the latter.
I see.
With all of this power and dominance in the world, the Numenoreans began to lose sight of the importance of the gift of men, their mortality, and they started to take their positions for granted. The Numenoreans began to become proud and afraid of death, being jealous of the elves and their immortality.
Oh,
Around the year 1800 of the Second Age, the Numenoreans began to establish dominions on the shores of Middle-earth, demanding tributes from their colonies.
So they weren't
Numenor
satisfied
began
with
to
the
see some divisions in loyalty between the
longer
two
life.
factions of the King's Men, those loyal to the Kings of Numenor, and the Faithful, those that were still dedicated to the Valar and the Elves.
I see.
As
They
the
weren't grateful
centuries
for their longer
wore
life
on,
compared to
elvish
humans.
tongues became forlorn
They
in
wanted
Numenor,
more.
though the kings and queens would still take their names from Quenya, as was the tradition. The Numenoreans would also speak out against the Valar and the Elves, and the great eagles of Mount Meneltarma would leave when the Numenoreans became hostile to the Valar.
Oh,
and as
wow.
Numenor declined, the lifespans of its people shortened as well,
Interesting.
giving rise to even greater fears of death. Around this time, the Nazgul started to appear, and we know that 3 of the 9 were Numenoreans as well.
Interesting.
Whether they were already corrupted or not by Sauron at this point is unknown, however. In Middle-earth, the fortress of Umbar would be founded in 2280, and this would be an outpost of the King's Men. In 2350, the fortress of Pelargir was built, and it would be the chief haven of the faithful Numenoreans. Civil unrest in Numenor continued, and Ar-Adu-Nakor, the 20th king of Numenor, outlawed Elvish in his presence, and he was the first to take his kingly name in Andunic, or the language of the West. This king began to persecute the faithful that were still friends of the Eldar and loyal to the Valar. Seldom would the elves still come to Numenor, but they
So
would
he wanted
secretly
them to be
go
loyal to
Andunic
him, not
in
the Valar.
West. These dogmatic views against the elves and the Valar continued in Numenor, and they were heightened during the reign of Ar-Gimilzur, the 23rd king, who outlawed Elvish in Numenor completely, and he moved the faithful to eastern Numenor, near the haven of Romena, where he kept watch over those that remained in Numenor, and did not sail to the lands near Pelargir in Middle-earth.
Okay.
This king neglected the traditions of past kings, such as ascending Meneltarma to display reverence to Iru Iluvatar, and tending the White Tree of Numenor, which was a symbol of friendship between Numenor and the West.
Oh, interesting.
The White Tree would soon fall into decline. However, Ar-Gimilzur unknowingly married one of the faithful, Enzilbeth, who taught their eldest son her beliefs. Their son would be the last to take a kingly name in Quenya, and he was known as Tar Palantir, the Far-Sighted. He would try to restore Numenor's glory in 3175 of the Second Age, but civil war would happen instead. This king's gift of foresight prophesied that if the White Tree ever perished, the line of kings would come to an end, so he properly tended it once more. He would also continue the ancient religious ceremonies of Numenoreans.
So he
However,
kind of restored the
Tar-Palantir's
faithful.
repentance was not enough to save Numenor from its past declines,
But not enough.
and the rebellions of Numenor's people. The elven ships never came from Tol Erissa to Numenor again, and the site of Erissa was even withheld from Tar Palantir. Darkness had come to Numenor,
Damn.
and not even Tar Palantir could save it. Eventually, Ar-Pharazôn, the king's nephew, would marry Tar Palantir's daughter, and he became the 25th and final king of Numenor in 3255.
Wow.
After Ar-Pharazôn's rise to power, Sauron, who yet lived in Middle-earth, taunted the Numenoreans into war, and so Ar-Pharazôn gathered a large host. And from 3261 to 3262, Ar-Pharazôn landed in Umbar and captured Sauron in Mordor. Their forces were so daunting and great that Sauron's servants abandoned him,
Oh, wow.
and the Dark Lord was forced to improvise. And so Sauron took on a fair form and humbled himself before Ar-Pharazôn the Golden. However, when Sauron was taken back to Numenor, the fallen Maya quickly corrupted the people of the island. Within 50 years,
Yikes.
Numenor had almost completely fallen, as the king's prized prisoner became his greatest advisor. The old traditions were gone.
I
The Council
see.
of the Scepter had been disbanded, and a
He was
temple
being like a
dedicated
worm
to
tongue.
Melkor was built, where human sacrifices were held.
Ooh.
Nimloth the Fair, which was the name of the White Tree of Numenor, was also burned, and the Great Armament began construction. The Great Armament was a naval force that was created for the purpose to overthrow the Valar and seize immortality for the men of Numenor.
Oh, damn. They were trying to get
Hope
immortality.
remained in the faithful. Amandil, the last lord of Andune, sailed to Aman with 3 trusted servants to warn the Valar about Ar-Pharazôn's plans.
So he could reach
And though
Aman?
Amandil was never heard from again, I must believe that he was successful, as the Valar knew what was to come.
Okay.
Towards the end of days of Numenor, Manwë sent storm clouds in the shape of his great eagles to warn the Numenoreans of their impending doom.
Oh.
Finally, in 3319 of the Second Age, Ar-Pharazôn landed with his host in Aman, and the Valar called upon Eru Ilúvatar for aid, as they were not allowed to fight the children of Ilúvatar directly.
Ah, interesting.
And so Eru did intervene in this moment, and it would be one of the only times in Middle-earth's history that he would do so.
Interesting.
Ilúvatar buried Ar-Pharazôn and his men on the shores of Aman, and he made the world round, taking Aman and Tol Erisa out of the sphere of the earth so that men could not go there again.
Wow.
It is stated in later volumes of the history of Middle-earth, however, that the world was always round, and the Numenoreans believed that it was flat.
Ah, okay.
But that is a point of contention within the lore that allows for an alternative story to take place concerning these events.
Yeah.
But for the sake of this video, we'll stick with the idea that the world was changed during the downfall of Numenor.
Okay.
Around the world, many shores, islands, and coastlines would be changed due to this event.
Okay.
Numenor was flooded, and the island sank beneath the waves. But 9 boats escaped from eastern Numenor, and in them were the faithful who yet bore the Palantiri, the Ring
the
of
faithful
Barahir, the
escaped.
Scepter of Anumenos, Narsil, and a fruit of Nimloth the Fair that Isildur, son of Elendil, had stolen from the White Tree of Numenor the night before its destruction. That first
So
sapling
it
would
could be
eventually be planted in Minas
replanted.
Ithil, and it would become the first White Tree of Gondor. Sauron and his followers among the Numenoreans were destroyed in the downfall,
Damn.
but Sauron's spirit endured and returned to Mordor.
I
The
see.
faithful would establish the realms in exile in 3320 of the Second Age, and they would be called Arnor and Gondor in Middle-earth.
Yep.
And these 2
Gondor.
kingdoms would carry on in the memory of fair Numenor, and in spite of
Wow.
corrupted Numenor and its survivors and descendants that still dwelt within Umbar and Harad in the south.
Eesh.
The Kingsmen would become the Black Numenoreans, and they would be dominated by the Dark Lord Sauron through the end of the Third Age. And so Arnor and Gondor lived on, remembering and honoring their ancestors that
That's why they
embodied
kept
what
that
men should be
tree.
before the downfall of Numenor.
Oh.
I see their reverence for Numenor alike to the love that the elves bear for Valinor and Beleriand. And for many of the Dunedain, the times of fair Numenor were the elder days of men. From the rise and downfall of Numenor, we may learn to not let our ambitions and pride overcome our virtue in life, as the Numenoreans did. We must never become complacent in how good we believe we are, as we can always become better, for there
Absolutely.
is always hope. We must remember to remain faithful to one another, so that we are not blinded by our own fears or ambitions. Thus we may avoid our own personal downfalls and continue to become better people throughout our lives.
Amen.
Thank you all so much for watching.
That
I
is
hope you guys enjoyed
beautiful.
this history.
Wow.
If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this video with a friend. So what do you all think about Numenor? And what other videos would you like to see me make concerning Numenor, its geography, peoples, or history? Please, be sure to let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to contact me more directly, please be sure to join us on Facebook and Twitter through the links in the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. Tomorrow I will have an announcement about more growth for this channel, so I hope you all look forward to that. Next week I'll be doing another overdue video that I talked about doing last summer, an epic character history on Samwise Gamgee. In the meantime, thank you all for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my friends.
Okay, wow. That was amazing. There is so much I learned that I had no idea was even a cause of these changes and aspects of Middle-earth and Aman/Valinor being the way they were. But that's really cool. And it's interesting how it rose in the Second Age. So in the First Age, it wasn't really a land, a habitable land at least. Okay, now I'm going to be learning about the Black Numenoreans. I'm very fascinated because he did mention it at the end of that first video, but now I'm going to have a more in-depth understanding. So let's get into it.
And Sauron gathered to him great strength of his servants out of the east and the south, and among them were not a few of the high race of Numenor. For in the days of the sojourn of Sauron in that land, the hearts of well nigh all its people had been turned towards darkness. Therefore, many of those who sailed east in that time, and made fortresses and dwellings upon the coasts, were already bent to his will.
Damn.
And they served him still gladly in Middle-earth. Greetings and well met, my fellow Dunedain and people of Westerness. Yoistin here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we will be looking at the men who fell from the high grace of Numenor under the corruption of Sauron, and became the Black Numenoreans, men of evil powers who served the Dark Lord.
Oh yeah.
I'll of course link some related articles and videos that helped with today's video, so please check those out for more information. Tolkien Gateway especially aided me today, as it helped me gather more information and sources.
Nice.
My friends, thank you all for joining me today. Let's begin our tale.
Okay.
We begin in Numenor during the Second Age. Originally, the men of Westerness were kind-hearted, having been the descendants of the Edain who fought against Morgoth during the First Age. Their ancestors had been given long life and other gifts, such as the island of Numenor for their valor in the Elder Days, and such gifts passed to their descendants. However, even though the men of Westerness had long life, the fear of death would begin to weigh on the minds of the Numenoreans, who could ask for nothing more. Some felt this dread more than others, as the population began to split between the faithful, those such as the lords of Andúnië, who would produce the house of Elendil, and the Kingsmen, who supported the later kings of Numenor. These two factions formed after 2221 of the Second Age, when Tar and Kalaman's reign caused a political and social split in the Numenorian people, and he himself was of the King's Men faction. The smaller group, the Faithful, held tradition, such as befriending elves and revering the Valar and Eru himself, even though they were not a majority of the population by the downfall of Numenor.
Damn.
Now the other larger party, the Kingsmen, are who we are more concerned with in this video.
The ones who got
They supported the later kings of Numenor who broke from tradition and opposed the ban of the Valar, and those who had immortality, something they themselves sought. They supported men like Gimilcad and his son Ar-Pharazôn, all of whom would contribute in bringing about the further darkening and eventual downfall of Numenor.
Wow.
Two driving ideological forces behind this faction of Numenoreans were the fear of death and the embrace of tyrannical and evil supremacy over others. These qualities made them susceptible to Sauron and his service.
Yeah.
In their names and words, they used and idolized the language of Adunaic, the Numenorian language. They
It's
used
kind of
that
like an
language
analogy
over
for
Quenya or
sinning
Sindarin,
makes you more
or
susceptible
even
to
common
the devil
speech.
in Christianity.
The Kingsmen would establish realms in the south of Middle-earth, such as Umbar and beyond, to escape the powers of High King Gil-galad. 3 of the Nazgul were Numenorians, and their rings came to them during the darkening of Numenor.
Including the Witch King.
I would imagine that they were Kingsmen, who were beguiled into taking these rings. And since he is the strongest of the 9 ring wraiths, I would imagine that the Witch King was one of these men. With his servants and strength, Sauron would begin assaulting the settlements of the Numenorians in Middle-earth. Now the Kingsmen that survived transitioned into the Black Numenoreans after the downfall of Numenor. The island was brought to its end by those who captured Sauron, only to be enthralled by him. And so the King's Men supported Ar-Pharazôn in breaking the ban of the Valar to attempt to take immortality from the lands of Aman and the Valar who dwelt therein.
Yikes.
Furthermore, the King's Men and their followers had made human sacrifices to Morgoth and Numenor.
That's messed up.
As time had gone on and Numenor had darkened, those very men who feared death most actually found shortcuts to it, as their lifespans were not as great as their forebears. And in breaking the ban of the Valar, Ar-Pharazôn and those with him found their ends in the Undying Lands during the reshaping of the world. And so, after the fall of the island in 3319 of the Second Age, the only King's Men to survive were those who had already gone to places such as Umbar in the south of Middle-earth. Elendil and his faithful men had survived, of course, and they flew from the destruction of Numenor on their ships and
the very
came to
faithful
Middle-earth,
or the very
establishing Arnor in the north
corrupted.
and Gondor in the south.
How
The
interesting.
Black Numenoreans dwelt thusly in Umbar and in other places south and east, continuing their allegiance to the shadow and worship of it, and the practice of dark arts, as well as their hatred of the faithful and their new realms. In the late Second Age, two black Numenorian lords, Hirumor and Fuinur, would rise to power among the Haradrim who dwelt near to Umbar, and they would dominate in power. Now, a few hundred years after the downfall of Numenor, the War of the Last Alliance took place, and the strength of the black Numenorians that remained aided Sauron.
I see.
And since the black Numenorians still had long lifespans in comparison to typical human lifespans,
Right.
it is likely that the children or grandchildren of those who lived in the south during the downfall were those who aided Sauron during the war, assuming, of course, that they were black Numenorians.
Yeah.
But of course, they were defeated in that war, and the black Numenorians and their servants would retain control of Umbar for a time, where once Ar-Pharazôn and his kingsmen had landed in Middle-earth to capture Sauron. The blood of the black Numenorians, just as it would be in Gondor and Arnor with the blood of the faithful Numenorians,
mixed.
would eventually become mixed with the blood of the men of Middle-earth.
Right.
As time went on, the black Numenorians would become lazy and idle, and would even squabble amongst themselves for power, as it so often is for those who seek power and domination with ill intent.
Yeah.
Faramir discusses this in The Two Towers, claiming that these Numenorians would fight each other until, in their weakness, they were conquered by wild men.
Interesting.
Thus,
I didn't know
enmities of
Faramir
an
said
age
that.
past would still be present in the Third Age, even as the blood of both the faithful men in Gondor and that of the kingsmen in the south and east eventually waned. It does seem, however, the black Numenorians would continue to have power and positions with power, being mighty themselves.
Okay.
Queen Baruthiel of Gondor, who married the Gondorian king
Look at all the cats.
Taranon Phalistor, the first of the ship kings of Gondor, was one such black Numenorian.
Damn.
She would use her cats to spy on her own folk. And
Cats
would
are
eventually be
lovely.
put on a
God,
ship
Tolkien
with her
didn't like
and
cats.
exiled from Gondor back to her homeland in the south. It is likely that in the many battles and wars between Gondor and the southern regions, the black Numenorians were lords and commanders during such strife.
Okay.
In 933 of the Third Age, during the war between King Eärnil I, second of the ship kings of Gondor, and he who repaired Pelargir, Gondor and their forces captured Umbar. But 82 years later, the same lords who were driven out of Umbar returned with forces from Harad, and slew the next king of Gondor, Kirandil, the third ship king, and retook Umbar. Since those lords who retook Umbar were the very same ones who lost it, it is most likely that they were black Numenorians, whose longer lives allowed them to do this.
To outlive, yeah.
Later on in the history of Gondor, during the civil war called the Kinstrife, from 1432 through 1447, the Gondorian blood of Numenor would wane further when King Romendekil II married a woman from the kingdom of Rovanion, making the future king, their son, Eldacar, lesser in the blood of Numenor. Castamir the Usurper, who was also descended from an Aryan, was himself a descendant of the faithful Numenorians, but he would cause a war for the Gondorian throne. Eventually, he was defeated and slain by Eldacar, who took the throne of Gondor, but Castamir's sons and forces would join with the people of Umbar, becoming the Corsairs of Umbar. While they themselves were not black Numenorians, Castamir's forces joined the black Numenorians, giving more Numenorian blood to that enemy of Gondor, while Gondor itself had lost much during the war, and the line of kings became further joined with the blood of middle men.
Okay.
Of course, that isn't a bad thing, for those with the blood of Numenor still committed great atrocities with their powers and gifts, and could be evil men, such as those who had it in Umbar.
We're more susceptible.
And middlemen who had no Numenorian blood could also accomplish great things, and were sometimes themselves heroes, such as the men in the kingdom of Rovanion. Now to continue forward. It's possible that during the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, the Black Serpent who led the Haradrim and was slain by Theoden King was himself a black Numenorian, but that's conjecture on my part.
Okay.
Indeed, Gothmog of the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, who was the lieutenant of Morgul, may himself have also been a black Numenorian, just as the lieutenant of Barad-dûr, the Mouth of Sauron,
the Mouth of
was
Sauron.
also a black Numenorean.
Interesting.
Finally, in our conversation about the black Numenoreans,
really
we must also mention the Mouth of Sauron, who himself had entered into the service of Barad-dûr when it rose again, around 2951 of the Third Age.
Really seems like Darkness and Sauron had
command, learning his lord's mind and fell
claws in
sorceries
them.
from him, and he had become more cruel than any orc. It was this black Numenorian who showed the captains of the West the tokens of the hobbits from Cirith Ungol, the mithril coat, the elvish cloak, and Sam's barrow blade, and he tried to goad the captains into surrender. He spoke also of the terms of Sauron that, if accepted, would have indubitably led to the Dark Lord's tyranny over the West.
Damn.
When the terms were utterly rejected and the West would not surrender, the mouth of Sauron loosed the armies of Mordor upon the host of the West, beginning the Battle of the Black Gate. Although it is unclear what happened to him and any other Black Numenoreans still in the service of Sauron.
Okay.
But it is clear that, whether they surrendered or ran from the power of Gondor under King Elisar, they could not escape death, like their ancestors had always wanted.
Yeah.
Even if their lives were drawn out, either by their Numenorean heritage
were still
or
not
some
immortal.
dark art by Sauron, they would eventually die, for the doom of the gift of men was one of the strongest destinies in Arda. Thus, while the blood of faithful Numenor would live on in the descendants of those such as Aragorn and Faramir, possibly continuing to fade over time, it is likely that the blood of darkened Numenor, that of the King's Men, would either be ended through war or would also fade away in time,
I see.
being the legacy of men that used that blood and long lifespan for evil. Thus, we come to the end of our tale about the Black Numenoreans, Middle-earth. From the tale of the Black Numenoreans, we see a very Tolkienian theme that the fear of something, such as death, must not drive us.
Yeah.
Or if it does,
It'll take you to dark
we often
places.
will find a quick and destructive road to meet that fear. Thank you all so much for watching, I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, please hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts, questions, additions, and corrections about the Black Numenoreans? Let me know in the comments below. For me, the Black Numenoreans are an interesting faction and foil to the descendants of Numenor, for they show how the gifts of long life and power can be used for evil and selfish purposes, rather than for good, as the men of the West tried to use them.
Yeah.
I do wish we knew more about them, though. Please check out our music channel, Facebook, Twitter, merch, and Patreon. Links are in the description below. There's a new podcast episode about the Two Towers movie up on Patreon, along with many, many other episodes, so please consider checking those out to help the channel. My friends, as always, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one, my great friends.
Okay, and there you have it. That was really fascinating, and I really like how he also kind of ended it explaining how each faction, whether it was the Faithful or the Kingsmen, kind of faded out throughout timelines, and how neither of them were that strong anymore or prevalent. But that's really fascinating, and I really liked learning about the Numenoreans, as I do know that they're a big part of the Rings of Power show, and they're just a huge part of Lord of the Rings lore in general. So I'm really glad that I learnt and fascinated by all that info. So yeah, please let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Make sure to leave a like if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!